The docking bay doors had been freshly cleaned for the occasion. That was the first thing Dova had done that morning. She had called the maintenance team personally and told them to polish every surface in Bay 12 until she could see her own reflection in the floor. She had arranged a small welcome banner. She had placed a bowl of dyed water on the greeting table because she had read somewhere that humans liked color. She had pressed her uniform twice. She had told the 6-member welcome party to smile, or at least to arrange their faces into whatever expression most closely resembled warmth. She had done everything right. She had not, in any of her preparations, considered the possibility that the human would bring a predator. Orvin Station had been home to 412 species over the past 30 years. It was a place of learning, of diplomacy, of shared meals and shared science. It floated in the slow pull of a binary star system, lit by 2 suns that rose and set in long amber cycles. The species who lived there were, without exception, descended from prey. Every culture on the station had built itself around the same basic truth. Something larger wanted to eat them once, and they had survived by being clever and careful and quiet. That history was in their blood, in their eyes, in the way they all still flinched at sudden movement. Humans were different. Dova knew this. Everyone knew this. The Galactic Union had debated the question of humans for 40 years, and the biological reports had all said the same thing. Apex predator class. Omnivorous. Territorial. Capable of sustained aggressive action. She had read every report. She had taken a course. She felt prepared. She was not prepared. The transport ship docked with a low mechanical thud, and the doors of Bay 12 slid open, and Rail walked out. He was not particularly large. He was not wearing armor. He had a bag over one shoulder and a calm look on his face, and he was smiling at her, and Dova thought, for one brief and relieved moment, that everything was going to be fine. Then he turned back toward the ship and said, quietly, "Come on, boy." The crate came first. It was large. It was reinforced. It had ventilation slots along the top, and from inside it came a sound, low and rhythmic, like something breathing very slowly and very deliberately. The crate was mounted on a small wheeled platform that Rail guided with one hand, and it was heavy enough that the platform's wheels left faint marks on Dova's freshly cleaned floor. He stopped in front of the welcome party and set the platform down. "I am Rail," he said. "I am very happy to be here." "We are very happy to have you," Dova said. Her eyes were on the crate. "What is in the container?" "This is Boar," Rail said, and he unlatched the front of the crate and opened it. The animal that stepped out was the color of a storm cloud. It was built the way a wall is built, broad and solid, and without any wasted space. Its head was enormous. Its jaw was wide and heavy, and when it opened its mouth to take in the smell of the bay, the teeth inside were visible, and they were not small teeth. It stood on 4 legs, and its shoulders came up to Rail's hip, and it weighed, as the station's automated bioscanner would later record with what seemed like quiet alarm, 67 kilograms. Its eyes were amber. It looked at the welcome party with those amber eyes. The welcome party looked back. Nobody moved. Then one of the junior delegates, a small Velen named Pell, made a sound that was not quite a word and stepped backward very quickly into the wall. An avian representative named Soru, who had traveled 2 days specifically to be present for this welcome, spread his wings involuntarily and then folded them again and then folded them a second time when they did not feel sufficiently folded. A crustacean delegate from the Orth delegation pressed flat against the greeting table and became very interested in the surface pattern of the floor. Rail did not notice any of this. He was kneeling beside the animal, one hand resting on its broad back, and he was saying something soft to it that Dova's translator rendered as a string of gentle nonsense words, and the animal's name repeated several times. The animal stood still under his hand. Its tail moved slowly from side to side. "He likes new places," Rail said, looking up. "He is going to want to smell everything. That is just what he does. Is that okay?" Dova's mouth opened. She was the administrator of a station that processed 400 diplomatic events per year. She had managed trade disputes and species disagreements, and once a situation involving a misunderstanding about the reproductive cycle of a Thurvac delegation. She was, by any measure, a competent and experienced professional. "Yes," she said. "Great," Rail said. He stood. He picked up the leash attached to the animal's collar. What should I call you? Dova, she said. Dova, good to meet you. He extended his free hand. She shook it. His hand was warm. His grip was firm but not aggressive. He had, she noticed, very flat and forward-facing eyes. And when he looked at you, both of them pointed at you at the same time, with total focus, the way a thing that hunts looks at something it has decided to pay attention to. She reminded herself that this was considered a friendly gesture among humans. This is Boar, Rail said again, nodding down at the animal. The animal Boar turned his great head toward Dova and looked at her. He had, she realized, the same quality of focus. Both eyes on her. Full attention. She felt, in a way she had not felt in her adult professional life, very small. He will not hurt you, Rail said. There was no uncertainty in his voice. He said it the way a person says something they have never once had reason to doubt. I see, Dova said. She turned to her assistant and said, very quietly and very steadily, please update the welcome manifest. The human's companion animal requires a station registry entry. What classification do I use? Her assistant whispered back. Dova looked at the animal. The animal looked at her. Its tail moved again, slow and heavy, like something that was in no hurry at all. Earth predator, she said. Domestic variant. Companion status. She paused. And tell maintenance that the floor needs cleaning again. Behind her, Boar yawned. The sound he made when he yawned was a low, wide, cavernous sound, and every tooth in his head was briefly visible. And the Orth delegate made a noise that no translator could classify, and left the bay at a speed that suggested considerable personal motivation. Rail watched them go. He looked mildly puzzled. Is there a lot of foot traffic in here usually? He asked. Not anymore, Dova said. She picked up her welcome folder. She straightened her uniform. She led the human and his predator down the corridor toward resident quarters, and the corridor cleared ahead of them like water moving away from a stone, and Dova told herself that she had done everything right. She just had not been given all the information. The security monitors in Dova's office showed 47 feeds at once. She did not usually watch all 47. She had a team for that. But 3 days after the human arrived, she found herself sitting in front of the full display every morning with a cup of warm broth that she forgot to drink, watching a single feed in the upper left corner labeled Habitat Ring Sector 4. The feed showed a corridor. The corridor was long and wide and lined with plants that the station's horticulture team had grown over many years, soft greenery engineered to tolerate recycled air and artificial light. It was a pleasant corridor. Residents used it constantly. It was, at any given hour of the morning cycle, one of the busiest paths on the station. At the moment, it was empty. It was empty because Rail was walking through it. He was walking slowly, the way a person walks when they are not in a hurry and have no particular destination and are simply enjoying the fact of moving through space. He had a warm drink in his free hand. The leash in his other hand ran down to Boar, who was walking at his side, and Boar was not walking the way most living things walked. He was not hurrying. He was not nervous. He moved with the heavy, unhurried confidence of something that had never, in its entire evolutionary history, been something else's meal. Every few steps, Boar would stop and press his nose to something. A planter, a wall seam, a bench. He would inhale with great seriousness and then move on, satisfied. Rail would wait each time without impatience. Ahead of them, the corridor kept clearing. It happened the same way each time. A group of residents would be walking, talking, going about their morning. Then someone in the group would see what was coming. They would stop. The group would stop with them. There would be a brief and silent moment of collective decision. Then they would find somewhere else to be. A side corridor. A shop entrance. One Velen family of 4 discovered an urgent need to examine a plant they had walked past every day for 2 years. A gallon courier, who Dova happened to know was late for a delivery, simply pressed his back against the wall and stood perfectly still until the human and the animal passed, and then resumed walking as if nothing had happened. Rail noticed none of it. He sipped his drink. He said something to Boar. Boar's tail moved. Dova's assistant, a young Velen named Fiss, came to stand beside her and watched the feed in silence for a moment. No incidents, Fiss said. No incidents, Dova agreed. He has been walking the ring for 22 minutes. I know. The animal has not displayed any aggressive behavior. I know. Fist was quiet for a moment. The animal just sat down in the middle of the corridor. They both watched. Boar had indeed sat down. He was sitting in the exact center of the corridor, in a patch of warm light from the overhead panels, and he had closed his eyes. Rail had stopped beside him and was looking down at him with an expression that Dova's translator described as fond. "He does this," Rail said, apparently to himself or to the dog or to no one in particular. "He finds a warm spot, and he just parks." He sat down on the bench nearby and waited. The corridor stayed empty for the duration. Dova sipped her broth. It had gone cold. She was still watching the feed an hour later when Rail took Boar to the common dining hall for the morning meal. She switched to that feed instead. The dining hall was large and bright, and normally filled with the overlapping sounds of 40 species eating at once. When Rail walked in with Boar, the sound dropped by roughly half in the span of 3 seconds. Residents near the entrance became very interested in their food. Several tables near the door decided they were finished eating and left. Rail did not notice. He collected a tray and found a table near the window wall, where the stars were visible through the plating, and he set Boar down beside his chair and began to eat. Then something happened that made Dova set down her broth entirely. A Gallon male came and sat down across from Rail. Dova knew this particular Gallon. His name was Tirek. He was a senior station scientist, insectoid, tall, with 6 arms that he used in pairs depending on what he was doing and compound eyes that processed visual information in a fundamentally different way than mammalian eyes. He was known on the station as someone who approached problems the way a tool approaches a nail, with complete focus and without sentiment. He had, according to his file, submitted over 300 research papers in his career. He was not, by anyone's description, a brave creature. He was simply more interested in data than in survival instinct. He sat down across from Rail. He folded 2 of his arms. He looked at Boar. Boar looked back at him. Rail chewed a piece of food and watched the 2 of them with mild interest. Tirek said something. Dova turned up the audio. "What is its predatory range?" "He does not hunt," Rail said. "He has never hunted. He is trained. All predators hunt. He does not need to. I feed him." Tirek processed this. "What do you feed him?" Rail named several ingredients. Tirek entered them into a small device he carried. "These are all things that could be sourced here," he said. "Yes." "He sleeps inside your quarters?" "On the bed, usually." Tirek was quiet for a moment. "On the bed," he repeated, as if testing the words. "He likes to be close," Rail said. "He is a companion animal. That is what companion means." Tirek looked at Boar again. Boar had, during this conversation, lowered his head onto Rail's foot and appeared to be falling asleep. His breathing was slow and audible. "May I touch it?" Tirek said. Rail looked at him. There was something in the look, not surprise exactly, but something quieter. "Yeah," he said. "Hold your hand out low. Let him smell you first." Tirek extended one of his lower hands, palm up, at the level of the table edge. Boar opened one amber eye. He considered the hand. He lifted his head. He leaned forward and pressed his nose against Tirek's fingers and inhaled with deep attention, the same way he had inhaled the bench and the planter earlier. Then he licked Tirek's hand. The tongue was broad and warm and covered Tirek's entire lower hand in one motion. Tirek did not pull back. He sat very still. His compound eyes did not move. After a long moment, he said, very quietly, "It is warm." Rail said. "He," Tirek repeated, without looking away from the dog. He did not move his hand for several minutes. Boar went back to sleep on Rail's foot. Dova watched the feed until the morning meal period ended. She then opened a new document on her station log and titled it, Human Integration Assessment, Day 3. She typed 2 lines. No incidents recorded. The animal chose to sleep in a public area. No residents were harmed. She looked at what she had written for a moment. Then she added a 3rd line. The animal is warm. This does not appear to be relevant to safety. Recording it anyway. She saved the file and went to get her broth reheated. There was a smell in Corridor 7C that nobody else could find. Not because it was faint. Not because it was hidden inside the walls or masked by the station's ventilation. It was present, chemical, real. But the noses of 400 species on Orvin Station were built from millions of years of the same basic priority. Find food, avoid predators, locate mates, detect danger. The smell in Corridor 7C was none of those things. It was a manufactured signal, a biological compound produced by a specific larval insect species, evolved over a long time to calm the nervous systems of exactly the kind of creatures that would be most likely to detect and destroy a nest. It said, in the language of chemistry and blood, "Nothing to see here. Move along. You are not interested in this." And so no one was. Rail was doing fieldwork that week. He was mapping atmospheric composition in the station's lower rings, which was boring work that involved carrying a handheld scanner through long service corridors and recording numbers into a tablet while Bohr walked beside him and investigated every surface with the dedication of a professional. Corridor 7C was not on his assigned route. He had taken a wrong turn because the service-level maps on his tablet were 2 years out of date and a junction that should have been labeled had not been. He did not realize he was in the wrong corridor. He was checking his tablet. Bohr stopped. It was not a gradual stop. It was the kind of stop that happens in the middle of a step, 1 foot half raised, the whole body going rigid at the same instant, like something had simply turned off the forward motion and replaced it with stillness. His nose went up. His ears, which usually sat folded and loose against his head, pulled tight and forward. His tail went straight back. Rail knew this posture. He had seen it exactly once before, in a field outside a research station on a moon called Dravac 7, when Bohr had stopped in the same way and Rail had eventually found a pressurized gas leak behind a wall panel that would have killed them both within the hour. He stopped walking. He looked at the sealed bay door that Bohr was staring at. The door was marked Secondary Cargo 7C. Empty. The light above it was green. Bohr did not move toward the door. He did not growl. He did not make any sound at all. He stood and looked at it with the full weight of his attention, the way he had looked at Tyrik's outstretched hand, except that this look had no warmth in it. It was the other kind of attention, the kind that predators use when they have found something and are deciding what to do about it. Rail took out his comm unit. He sent a message to CERN, head of station security, and he kept the message short because he did not have anything precise to say. He wrote, "My dog stopped at Bay 7C in the lower service ring and will not move on. He is showing alert behavior. I do not know if this means anything, but I thought you should know." He did not know if CERN would take the message seriously. He also did not try to open the bay door himself. He sat down on the corridor floor, cross-legged, the way he sat when he was going to wait for a while, and he said, "Okay, buddy, we wait." Bohr did not sit. He kept standing. He kept watching the door. CERN received the message 40 minutes into his shift and read it twice. He was not, by nature, a creature who dismissed unusual information. He had spent 19 years in station security, and the thing that had kept him in the job that long was a habit of taking small things seriously. A wrong manifest entry was small. A junction light that flickered once was small. A human's companion predator stopping in a corridor it had no business being in and refusing to move was, technically, nothing. There was no protocol for it. There was no classification in his security system for dog-based anomaly detection. He cross-referenced the bay anyway. The manifest said empty. The environmental log said the bay had been inactive for 6 weeks. The last recorded access had been a routine inspection by a cargo technician named Oren. He pulled Oren's recent activity. He was not looking for anything specific. He was just looking. He found 3 things in 20 minutes that he should have found 3 weeks ago, if he had been looking 3 weeks ago. Small things. A shipment logged as delivered but not scanned through the main inventory system. A secondary ventilation bypass on Bay 7C that had been manually set and never unset. A visitor access card issued to a Drevithi female named Vin who appeared in the station records as a certified inspection contractor, but whose certification number, when he checked the union registry directly, did not exist. CERN gathered 4 security officers and went to Bay 7C. He overrode the door manually. The chemical smell hit them the moment the seal broke, and every officer with him made some involuntary physical response. A step back, a hand to the face, a sudden and overwhelming sense that there was nothing interesting in this room, and perhaps they should leave. One of his officers actually turned and walked 2 steps back down the corridor before stopping himself with visible effort. CERN felt it too. The pull of it. The flat, soft, chemical suggestion. Nothing here. You are not interested. Go. He was a Thurvac. He was reptilian, cold-blooded, prey-descended, and the compound hit his nervous system the same way it hit everyone else's. It was not a small thing. It was like a hand on his shoulder, gentle and insistent. He went in anyway, because he was also a security officer with 19 years of practice at doing things his nervous system argued against. They found the crates in the back of the bay. 47 sealed containers, each one warm to the touch, each one emitting a faint and rhythmic sound that the scanner identified in under a second. The species, Greth larvae, invasive class, banned from all Union installations under the Compact of Shared Habitats, which had been written 60 years ago after a Greth infestation destroyed a station ecosystem in less than a month. Oren and Vin were apprehended in their quarters 2 hours later without incident. They had been moving the larvae in small batches, bypassing the main cargo flow, planning to sell them to a contact outside Union space who would sell them to someone else who would sell them to someone who had reasons of their own for wanting an invasive predator species that no one could stop once it was established. In his incident report, CERN wrote the full account. Detection method, he left for last. He sat for a while before he filled it in. The bay's atmospheric sensors had shown biological trace readings that were below the automatic alert threshold. No standard scanner sweep had flagged it. No crew member had reported anything. The chemical suppression had worked on everyone on the station for 3 weeks without a single exception. One exception. He typed, detection initiated by companion animal of station resident rail, human. Animal classification, Earth predator, domestic variant, companion status. He looked at what he had typed. He added one more line. Predator class nervous system appears unaffected by Greth larval suppression compound. Human companion bond created in formal patrol presence in lower service ring outside standard security routes. Recommend review of current detection gap in prey descended crew baseline. He saved the report. He sent it to Dova's office. He then went back to his own feed and pulled up the corridor camera for 7C. Rail was still sitting on the floor. Boar had finally sat down beside him, close enough that they were pressed together, side by side, both of them very calm. Rail had one hand resting on the dog's back. He appeared to be looking at nothing in particular. He had, CERN realized, just sat there in that corridor for nearly 3 hours, in a dead-end service passage with no specific reason to be there, because his animal had told him to stay. And he had stayed. CERN watched the feed for a long moment. Then he turned it off and went to file a second report, this one about the ventilation system, which was going to need a full overhaul and was going to be a significant amount of paperwork. But he thought about that corridor for the rest of the shift. The council chamber on Orvin Station had a high ceiling and long curved walls that were designed, according to the original station blueprints, to make every species feel equally small in the room. 6 chairs sat around a central table that was shaped like a shallow bowl, and above the table hung a wide display screen. On the screen, today, was a photograph taken from the Bay 7C security feed, timestamped the morning of the discovery. It showed a large brindle dog standing very still in a corridor, facing a sealed door, with a human sitting cross-legged on the floor behind him. 6 council members sat in their chairs and looked at the photograph and waited for someone to say something first. Yara, the eldest of the Thurvac delegation and the longest-serving member of the council, said it. She was old, slow-moving, and entirely without patience for indirect conversation. So, she said, the predator found the contraband. The animal found it, Dova said. She was standing at the front of the room, which was her usual position when presenting, and she was doing a good job of keeping her voice level. It would be more accurate to say that the animal alerted its handler, who alerted security, who then conducted the discovery. An animal cannot alert anyone to a security threat, said Pellin, the Gallon logistics delegate. He had 6 arms and a habit of folding them all at once when he was skeptical. He had all 6 folded now. Animals respond to stimuli. They do not assess threats. With respect, CERN said, from his chair on the far side of the table, what the animal did and what it understood are different questions. What it did was stop in a corridor, hold position for over 2 hours, and refuse to move until its handler investigated. The outcome of that behavior was the discovery of 47 containers of prohibited larval material. Whether it understood what it had found is not, functionally, relevant. Pellin unfolded one pair of arms and immediately refolded them. You are crediting an animal with a security function it was never assigned. I am crediting it with the outcome, Cern said. There was a pause. Besso, the Velen medical delegate, who had been quiet since the session began, raised one small hand. I would like to ask a different question, she said. The Greth larvae produce a suppression compound. It affected every organic crew member in the lower ring for 3 weeks. The human's animal was not affected. She paused. Why? Tyrek answered from the observer seats along the wall. He had not been granted a formal seat at the table, but no one had told him he could not attend, and so he had arrived early and positioned himself where he could see everything. Predator-class nervous system architecture, he said. The compound is calibrated for prey-descended biology. It works on the alert pathways, the part of the nervous system that says danger is nearby and makes the organism want to leave. Prey species have very sensitive versions of that pathway. The compound suits it. A predator's alert pathways function differently. They are not built around avoidance. They are built around assessment. So the dog simply was not suppressed, Besso said. Correct. To the dog, the bay smelled unusual. That was a signal to investigate, not to ignore. There was no suppression mechanism that could override a predator's interest in an unusual smell. Another pause. The photograph on the screen had not changed. The dog stood in the corridor, very still, amber eyes on the door. Pelin looked at the photograph. Then he looked at Dova. What is the proposal before this council? Dova cleared her throat. 2 proposals, actually. The first came from Delegate Was, who submitted before this session that the animal should be confined to the human's quarters, except during scheduled and supervised outdoor periods, in recognition of the stress its presence creates for other residents. And the second? Yera said. The second is from station security. Cern recommends granting the animal permanent free access status throughout the station, equivalent to a registered station resident. The silence that followed was of a different kind. Pelin unfolded all 6 arms. That is absurd. I agree it is unusual, Cern said. I also agree with the outcome I am recommending. The station's detection capability has a known gap. Prey-descended biology cannot be reliably calibrated for predator suppression compounds. The animal closes that gap. It does so without a salary, without a schedule, without a security clearance, and without a single incident report in 3 weeks of full access. There have been many incidents, Pelin said. There has been discomfort, Cern said. That is not the same as an incident. Yera made a sound that, in Thurvak, signified something between agreement and mild amusement. The crustacean from the docking bay welcome, she said. The one who hid in its own shell. Did not require medical attention, Cern said. No, Yera agreed. It did not. The debate continued for another hour. Was's motion to confine the animal was put to a vote. It failed. Cern's recommendation was discussed, amended slightly to include a standard registry entry for Bohr as a non-sentient station resident with open access rights, and then put to a vote. It passed, 4-2. Pelin was one of the 2 who voted against. He would later, in private, admit to Dova that he had spent 3 full minutes the evening before watching a recording of the animal sitting peacefully in the sunlight of the habitat ring while young station residents of various species approached it with food offerings. He did not mention this to anyone else. Rail was told about the vote that afternoon. He was in his lab, running samples, and Dova brought him the formal notification in person because she wanted to see his face when he read it. His face, when he read it, was confused. He is already a resident, Rail said. He was registered as an accompanying item, Dova said. Now he is registered as a resident. It is different. Rail looked at the registration document. He looked at Bohr, who was under the desk. He looked back at the document. Does he get a room number? He shares yours. Does he get a meal card? Dova paused. She had not considered this. I will look into it, she said. Rail folded the document carefully and set it on the desk. He crouched down and said something quiet to Bohr, and Bohr's tail moved and thumped twice against the underside of the desk. Dova watched this and found, to her mild personal surprise, that she was not afraid of the animal today. She was not sure exactly when that had changed. It had not been a single moment. It had been something more gradual, built from daily security feeds and incident reports that recorded nothing and the memory of Tyrek sitting at a dining table with a 6-armed hand very still while a predator rested its warm head against it. The view from the council room had a long window that faced the station's inner garden ring. That evening, after the session ended, she stood at the window for a while and watched the garden. A pair of young Velen children were chasing something small and fast through the low plants. An elderly Gallon sat on a bench and read. Boar was there too. He had found a warm patch of light on the garden path and was lying in it with his eyes mostly closed. As she watched, one of the Velen children ran directly into him, stumbled, grabbed a fistful of his fur to keep from falling, and then sat down on top of him without apparent concern. Boar did not move. His tail moved. The child, apparently finding the large brindle animal a satisfactory place to sit, stayed there. Dova updated her assessment log. Day 24. No incidents. She paused, then added, the council voted correctly. She closed the log and went home. The maintenance vessel arrived at docking ring 4 on a Tuesday during the low-traffic shift. Nobody paid much attention to it because it was a small ship and it was carrying a valid clearance code, and the automated system logged it as a routine inspection vessel from a contracted servicing company. The company was real. The clearance code was real. The 3 crew members who came off the ship were not from the company, and the credentials they were carrying had been purchased from someone who had purchased them from someone else, and the chain was long enough that CERN's initial scan found nothing wrong. He found something wrong 40 minutes later when he ran the secondary check that he ran on all unscheduled arrivals, the deeper one that took longer and that most stations did not bother with because it slowed things down. The secondary check found that the servicing company's chief officer had reported her station's credentials stolen 11 days ago. The report was in a secondary union registry that the primary scanner did not access. CERN locked the maintenance vessel remotely. He pulled the station sensor grid for the 3 individuals and found nothing in the main corridors. They had already moved into the service access system, the low-clearance maintenance passages that ran beneath the main floor level of the station and connected to every wing through ceiling and wall access points. He sent security teams into the service passages. He sent a general alert to senior staff. He began going through the station manifest for anything that a crew from outside the union might want badly enough to use false credentials. He found it in under 3 minutes. Rail's Xenobiology Lab, Section 9, Research Wing. Rail was currently cataloging a collection of rare plant derivative compounds that had taken him 8 months to gather from 3 separate survey missions. Several of them had documented pharmaceutical applications in Union medical research. Several others had documented black market applications in non-union pharmaceutical networks. CERN tried to reach Rail on his comm. Rail did not answer. He was, the lab access log showed, already inside the lab with the door locked from the inside, which was standard practice for handling sensitive organic material. CERN began moving security teams toward Research Wing 9. He estimated 4 minutes. He had reason, shortly afterward, to think about those 4 minutes for a long time. Inside the lab, Rail was not thinking about any of this because he did not know any of it. He was thinking about a plant sample from a moon called UV3 that had been behaving unusually in the controlled atmosphere, and he was trying to work out whether the behavior was a stress response to the station's air mix or a normal growth cycle that he simply had not observed before. It was the kind of problem that took all of his attention when he was working on it. Boar was not thinking about the plant sample. Boar was lying under Rail's workbench, which was his default position in the lab. He had been there since they had arrived that morning. He had slept for some of it. He had watched Rail for some of the rest. He was a dog who was, in most ways, a very simple creature. He needed food and exercise and to be near the person he had chosen, and when he had all 3 of those things, he was content. The third thing was his primary requirement. He knew where Rail was at all times. He knew how Rail moved and how Rail breathed and what Rail's hands sounded like when they were working and what his voice sounded like when he was talking to himself versus when he was talking to the dog. He knew all of this not because he had learned it, but because he was built to know it, in the old and particular way that his species had been built over 10,000 years of living beside a human species that needed a companion and chose, from all the animals of Earth, to make this specific deal with this specific kind of creature. He heard the maintenance shaft access panel in the ceiling of the outer corridor before it opened. The sound was very small, a mechanical release, the kind of quiet click that the station's ambient noise would have swallowed entirely. Boar's ears pulled forward. He stood up. He did not bark. He placed himself between Rail's workbench and the lab door, and he faced the door, and he was still. Rail looked up from the plant sample. He saw the dog's posture. He set down the sample. He did not ask any questions. He moved to the emergency comm panel on the wall and pressed it and said, quietly, "CERN. Lab 9. Right now." Then he stood behind Boar and waited. The lab door opened 30 seconds later. The first of the three came through the door and stopped. He was large. His species, the Vreth, were broad and heavily built, with thick outer plating on their shoulders and forearms that served as natural armor, and they carried themselves with the ease of creatures who had rarely encountered something that made them reconsider their direction. He had a short-range stunner in his upper hand and two more of his companions behind him, and the lab was small and contained, and there was one human in it, which was not a concerning number. He saw the dog. He stopped moving. The two behind him pressed forward slightly before they also saw the dog, and then they also stopped. Boar stood in the center of the lab floor, and he did not make a sound. He did not bark. He did not lower his head or bare his teeth. He did not perform any of the threatening behaviors that the Vreth had read about in the Union's species threat assessments, which listed several. He simply stood. Both of his amber eyes were on the lead Vreth. Not moving, not blinking, just on him, with the full and unbroken weight of an attention that was not curious and was not afraid, and had made a decision and was waiting to see what happened next. The lead Vreth had been briefed on Earth predators. He had read the biological classification. Apex class. Domesticated variant. He had thought that last word, domesticated, meant harmless. He had thought it meant contained. He had thought it was the same as trained or managed or controlled, words that implied a thing that had been reduced from what it was. He understood, in the 4 seconds he stood in that doorway, that he had misunderstood entirely. The dog had not been reduced. The dog had been directed. There was a difference that no biological database had ever found a clean way to explain, and the Vreth understood it now not as information, but as a physical sensation, something that moved through his plating and his blood and found the oldest part of his nervous system, and said, very clearly, "This thing has decided not to move, and it will not move, and you do not want to find out what happens if you cross it." The stunner in his hand did not feel like enough. The two behind him pressed back slightly toward the door. He did not fire. He could have fired. The stunner was in his hand, and the range was short, and the animal was not moving. There were 3 of them. Logically, the advantage was clear. He did not fire. CERN and 2 security officers came through the outer corridor access 15 seconds later. The 3 Vreth were still in the doorway. Boar was still in the center of the lab. No one had moved. The apprehension was fast and without complication. The 3 Vreth put up no resistance at all. Later, in processing, CERN sat across from the lead Vreth in a secure room and asked him one question. "Why did you stop?" The Vreth was quiet for a long time. His plating had shifted, the biological equivalent of a stress response, and it had not fully shifted back. "The animal did not move," he said at last. CERN waited. It did not growl. It did not show teeth. It looked at us. A pause, and we understood that it would not stop. CERN filed his report. In the medical bay, Rail was sitting on an examination bench getting a bandage on his left hand, which he had scraped on the comm panel in the dark. The medic, a quiet villain named Bresso who had been treating station residents for 20 years, told him it was a minor abrasion and it would heal in 2 days. Dova was in the bay when he arrived. She had come as soon as the alert cleared. "Were you frightened?" she asked him. He was looking at Boar, who had come with him and was lying across his feet under the examination bench. He reached down without thinking and put his hand on the dog's back. "No," he said. He said it simply, not to reassure her, not to be impressive, in the way of a person stating a fact that requires no commentary. "Boar was there," he said. Dova looked at the dog. The dog's eyes were closed. He was breathing slowly, his wide sides rising and falling against Rail's feet. She had no frame for what she was looking at. There was no entry in any cultural database she had ever read that described what it looked like when a species took the most dangerous thing they knew and made it love them, and then put their safety in that love without hesitation, and were right to do so. She stood there for a moment, looking at it, and felt something she did not have a word for in her own language. She filed the incident. Under security notes, she wrote, Threat neutralized prior to security arrival. No shots fired. No injuries. Deterrent. Companion animal of station resident rail. Earth predator. Domestic variant. Companion status. She paused. Then she added the last word she had added to every entry since the day rail arrived. Effective. Elder Mori arrived without ceremony. That was the first thing that surprised Dova. She had been told to expect the Union's most senior cultural assessor, a Velen who had served on 4 separate integration review boards over 60 years of active service, and she had prepared accordingly. Welcome delegation. Clean corridors. A formal address. He sent a message 2 hours before arrival telling her not to bother. He said he preferred to observe without arrangement because arranged observations told him what a station wanted him to see, and unedited ones told him what was actually there. He was 83 years old, and he moved slowly, and he had very pale eyes that did not appear to miss anything they looked at. He arrived on a small transport with 2 junior delegates who took notes and stayed in the background, and he walked off the ship with a small bag over one shoulder and said, "Show me the garden. I will find everything else myself." He spent 2 days walking the station. Dova received brief updates from her assistant, who was tracking him discreetly. On the first day, Mori visited the science wing, spoke with Tirek for 2 hours, and ate a meal in the common dining hall at a table near the window. On the second morning, he walked the habitat ring at the same time Rail and Boar did their morning walk, and Dova's assistant reported that Mori had paused at the end of the ring and watched them come down the corridor without speaking or moving for several minutes. He met with CERN on the afternoon of the second day. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. CERN had told Dova before it happened that he was going to give the honest version of everything, which she had taken as a warning of some kind, though she was not sure what kind. Afterward, CERN came to her office and sat down. He was quiet for long enough that she poured him a drink without being asked, which was something she had never done before. "He asked me what the human brings," CERN said. "What did you say?" CERN turned the drink in his hands. "I said he brought the dog." He paused. "And then I said something I had not planned to say." Dova waited. "I said that a species that domesticated an apex predator and made it love them is not a species you want as an enemy, but it may be the only species in the Union that you want standing beside you in the dark." The room was quiet for a moment. "And," Dova said. "He wrote it down," CERN said. "That is all. He wrote it down." Elder Mori spent his last evening on the station alone, or as alone as he had been at any point. He walked to the habitat garden at the low end of the inner ring, where the light panels had been set to the long, warm amber of an early evening cycle. The garden was not large, but it had been growing for 30 years, and it had a kind of established depth to it, the way a place gets when living things have been given enough time and attention. He sat down on a bench near the center path. He had his bag. He took out a writing device, old-fashioned, the kind that used physical marks on physical material, and he held it in both hands and looked at the plants around him without writing anything. Boar found him 12 minutes later. He came from the far end of the garden path, nose to the ground, doing the slow investigative walk he did in new sections of familiar space. He found the bench. He found Mori sitting on it. He stopped and lifted his head and looked at the old Velen with both amber eyes at once, the full attention look, the one that said, "I see you. I am deciding." Mori did not move. He was good at being still. Boar stepped forward and pressed his nose against the old Velen's knee and inhaled with the deep and serious attention that he gave to everything important. Then he stepped back. He considered. He circled once, slowly, and lay down on the path near the bench's end, close enough that his shoulder was almost touching Mori's foot. He closed his eyes. Mori looked down at him for a long time. He was still looking at him when Rail appeared at the garden entrance, holding the leash that was pointless because Boar had already found someone to be near. He looked at the old Velen on the bench and at the dog on the path beside him, and he said, "I am sorry. He does this. He just decides about people sometimes." "Decides what?" Mori said. Rail thought about it for a moment. "That they are safe, I think." Mori was quiet. He looked down at Boar again. The dog's breathing was slow and even. Rail found a second bench nearby and sat down. He did not attach the leash. He did not call Boar back. He let the dog lie where he had chosen to lie, and the three of them shared the warm light of the garden in the kind of quiet that happens when no one has anything urgent to say and no one needs to fill the space. After a while, Maury said. We debated for 40 years whether to invite your species. I know, Rail said. We were afraid of what you would bring. Rail looked at him, but did not answer. We were right to be afraid, Maury said. He looked down at Boar. We were afraid of the wrong thing. We thought you would bring weapons. Capacity for conquest. Hunger that would not stop. He paused. You brought this. The dog's side rose and fell. He is just a dog, Rail said. Yes, Maury said. That is what makes it remarkable. He was quiet for another moment. On our world, the large animals were always something to avoid. We built our civilization around the art of not being caught. Every species in this station comes from a world like that. Every protocol we have, every alarm system, every social structure, every instinct that tells us to keep our voices low and our movements small and our exits in view, all of it comes from that original fact. Something wanted to eat us once, and we survived. He looked at Rail. You survived differently, he said. You looked at the thing that was hunting you, and you decided to make it your family. You spent 10,000 years learning each other, and now you carry it with you across the stars, and it lies down in gardens beside strangers and decides they are safe. Rail looked at Boar. He did not say anything. We have been looking for what humanity brings to the Union, Maury said. We have argued about your aggression and your history and your biological classification and your unpredictability. He paused. Nobody argued about this. We did not think to. He wrote something in his book with the old-fashioned writing device. He did not say what it was. He filed his report to the Union Council the following morning before his ship departed. The report was 40 pages long and covered every aspect of the human integration assessment, security incidents, behavioral data, interspecies interaction records, station stability metrics. The recommendation section was at the end. It was 3 sentences. Open formal membership discussions with humanity at the earliest available session. The concerns about predator class biology are real, but have been measured against the wrong frame. They are not a danger to be managed. They are a bridge that has not yet been built. The addendum was handwritten and attached as a separate note, in his own script, in the old formal vellum that he had grown up reading and rarely used in official documents because most people found it difficult. He wrote it anyway. He wrote, I sat in the garden with one of their animals this evening. It chose to lie beside me. I do not know what I gave it that made it choose that. Possibly nothing. Possibly just the absence of threat. But it lay there in the warm light and breathed, and I felt something that I do not have a clean word for in any language I speak. I have been in this work for 60 years. I have assessed the integration of 31 species into the Union structure. I have never before felt the need to include a personal note in a formal report. I am including one now because I think the Council should understand that what humanity brings is not only a security asset or a biological advantage or a diplomatic opportunity. It is something older than all of those things. Something they learned on their own world, in the dark, before they had fire or ships or any of the things we measure when we assess a species. They learned to trust the thing with teeth. Not because it was safe, because they chose to make it so. Recommend full engagement. With appropriate awe. He signed his name and attached it to the report and sent it. The same morning, Rail walked the habitat ring with Boar, as he did every morning. The corridor was not empty. It had not been empty for weeks. Residents walked past and nodded. A gallon technician who passed them every day had started leaving a small food item on the bench by Junction 4, the kind of food that Rail had once mentioned, very casually, that Boar enjoyed. At the far end of the ring, near the wide observation window that looked out at both stars, a group of young residents had gathered, as they sometimes did. They were from 5 different species. The smallest of them, a Velen child, was already running toward Boar before Rail had finished coming around the corner. Can we? The child said, which was the whole question. Yes, Rail said, which was the whole answer. Boar sat down in the way he sat when he had made a decision, square and solid and patient, and the children pressed close around him, small hands and larger ones, and ones that were different in every way from hands pushing into his brindle fur. He closed his eyes. Rail stood and watched them. He watched a Gallon child, who was afraid of almost everything and had been working up to this moment for 2 weeks, finally put a tentative 6-fingered hand on Boar's broad back, and he watched the child's face when it registered the warmth of it, the real and present warmth of a living thing that had decided they were safe. He did not have a word for what he saw on the child's face. He had a word for what it came from. He had learned it from a dog. He had learned it the way all humans learned it, slowly, over 10,000 years of practice, in the dark, before the stars. He called it trust.